We had a huge family with my father and mother, and we were 8, and we lived with my grandmother in a huge house near the sea. What marks me more was sailing with my father, because we lived near the sea. My father used to sail, and I started very young, and that was the time when I really enjoyed it most. As most kids, you know, the company of a father when you're doing something like sport is something that you would never forget. I speak German because I learned German with my grandmother before I actually went to school. So punctuality is one thing I inherited from the German roots. Another thing is music, because classical music was always present, which is typical of a German family where people played music. And I don't play music, but my dad played and my grandmother played. So that's probably what kept me more in connection with my German roots. Changing from a German school, I was 9 years old, to a public school, a Portuguese public school, was first of all a shock, because you feel no protection. It's like walking into a totally new world where I knew nobody in my class, whereas before I knew everybody. It was strange to take the tram and go to the city, because we lived near the sea and the city was separate. So I had to take a tram for 35 minutes and walk to school. So it was a little bit frightening. But then also it was funny to meet totally different people with totally different interests, who told me about soccer and who told me about their lives, which was totally different from mine. Actually, I enjoyed. I did not enjoy moving to London, because I finished high school during the year of the revolution, and everything was going on in Portugal, and I really wanted to stay. It was a time of optimism. It was a crazy time in 1974. So I sort of regret not having lived that first year of freedom. It was a family tradition. My father had studied in England during the Second World War. My grandfather had been a student and a professor at Columbia University in New York. My second brother, he studied in Germany. So it was a family tradition to move out. So I knew beforehand that I would have to live abroad. During the revolution, soon after the revolution in Portugal, we had a communist coup in Portugal in 1975. My father was sent to jail for no reason other than being an industrialist, and it was a very tough time. So I came back to Portugal first, but my mother decided that I should go back to London. I had to work and study at the same time. We did not know where my father was, so it was not a very happy time. It was strange to listen to the news and to not know what was happening the next day in Portugal, you know, and for a 19-year-old kid to know that your dad is in jail. You don't know where he is. You know, he did nothing wrong. He was never accused of anything. And suddenly also to study and work at the same time, because to make ends meet, it was necessary to do that, was very, very tough. When I came back, first of all, I decided I did not want to come back straight to Portugal. So I went to Norway to work in Norway. I worked in Norway a couple of months. Then I moved to Denmark, and eventually to Germany, to Hamburg, because we had an old shipping company. My father was in industry, but we had an old shipping company which had been more or less confiscated by the previous government in 1961. And it had always been in my mind that I wanted to start again with that family business. So I wanted to learn about shipping, and the best way was to work with ship owners and ship brokers. So that's why I sort of went around Europe learning and making connections. And I came back to Portugal in 1979, and I started with this small office. It was a ship agency. It had been a ship owner, but the ships had been confiscated from us in the early 60s. And then I started with that kind of business, and it sort of developed into a big shipping company. Well, I was 27, I had married, I had a young son, he was a year old. I was sailing competitively. Everything was going smoothly, and suddenly there was this terrible thing. I did not know what was going on. You know, I came back from a trip to London. I had played rugby a week before, and I felt sick. I did not know. I had no pain. I was just tired, and I did not know what to do. So I called my doctor, and my doctor said, "You probably had a drink too much," something like that. So, you know, when you're 27 and you're a sportsman and everything goes well, people don't really believe that something's going wrong. And then it was funny because I arrived home, I told my wife, and she said, "Why don't you call the pediatrician, Gonzalo's, my son's doctor? Maybe he will tell you what to do." And he said, "Well, if you feel sick, you should have your blood taken, and you come here, you come and see me." And so I did, and some hours later he called me and said, "Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're very sick." And he told me basically that my kidneys had stopped for no apparent reason. And he said, "Well, prepare yourself because it's most likely you're going to die." And he was a very old man, a very quiet man. And he told me that, and it was very funny because the first thing I thought was about my son. I think that's what everybody does, you know. And said, it can't happen. It's not possible. And maybe he made a mistake. So immediately I started making phone calls. I phoned one of my partners. He said, "Oh, you're joking," and he put the phone down. Then I called my dad, and my dad said the same. You know, "No, that must be a mistake. You're not going to die." It's a sort of thing that you can't even remember because suddenly I started really feeling I was dying, and I went to hospital, and I spent 4 or 5 days more or less in coma, and they did some sort of operation. And I started on hemodialysis, which I did for almost 3 years, which in those days, in the 70s, it was early 80s, it was a terrible thing, but I survived. I ended up making a transplant in 1986 because one of my brothers, he wanted to give me a kidney, which again was not normal in those days. I did it in London, and after that I had no more health problems. Everything went fine. So it's a sort of second life, you know, the sort of circle. You know, suddenly things go back to normal. First of all, I was traveling too much. I was the last year before I sold my business, I spent 200 days outside of my home. This together with my illness led to a divorce. I wanted to look after my son, and also shipping was changing. It was a little bit the old times. You know, we were very proud to fly the Portuguese flag wherever we went, and suddenly everything changed in Europe. European ships started having Filipino crews. They started using Panama flag. They started using almost slave labor, and I did not want that. And eventually I found that the best option was to step out. And one day I was invited by one of my competitors. He invited me for lunch. We were eating shrimp not far from here. And he said, "Rui, you know, why don't you sell me your business? Why are we competing?" So I called my father, who was also my partner still, and I said, "Why don't we sell?" And he said immediately, "If that's the best choice for you, I think we should." So we decided in 1 week to sell a business which had been with us for 100 years or something like that. After all these things, having started working very early, having difficulties during my studies because my father had been in jail, after all these successive events, I just wanted to enjoy life. I spent a few years traveling around, enjoying things, going to museums I always had wanted to visit, reading, so it was a sort of break in my life. I was appointed chairman of the Associação Comercial do Porto, the Chamber of Commerce, basically because I had time. I had time, and they wanted someone who could devote his time freely to an association which was sick at the time. It was the oldest association in the city. It was connected to the Portuguese Civil War in the 19th century. It was the House of Freedom in the city of Porto, and it was totally derelict. It was in very bad condition. And my great-grandfather had been the chairman in the beginning of the 20th century. And so they invited me, and they said, "Why don't you give it a try?" And I looked at the building, I looked at what was going there, and it was funny because it's a beautiful building with an Arabian room with a lot of opportunities, but it was totally closed. The number of members had gone down dramatically. Most did not pay anything, and it was a closed door. And when I looked, I said, well, there must be a huge potential about this building, you know. And so I asked the members if, I told the members, if you want me to be president, there's one thing. We are going to open the house. We are going to restore it to the original activities, which had been an open house. We are going to bring in tourism. But talking about tourism in Porto in 2001, nobody believed, because Porto was more or less unknown by tourists. So we found some support, we spoke with companies, and we started basically a process of turning that building into its former glamour, which it has today. These days, when you look at the center of Porto, the historical center of Porto, you see it's a fantastic place. That's where everybody wants to go. Back in 2001, it had lost, in 30 years, it had lost 40% of the population. It was totally empty. I remember exiting the Palace of the Bolsa at night, or in the evening, and it was dangerous to walk outside. There was nobody around. I think it was inspirational for the historical center that the building like the Associação Comercial, the Palácio da Bolsa, which is a big building, suddenly was flourishing. And there was music going on, and there were people coming, and there was a nice restaurant, there were venues, and there were congresses, and people wanted to go there. So it is a sort of thing that spread around, and I think it helped me then in 2013 when I decided to compete for the elections, and I decided that we had to go one step further, that we had this success with the building, which was, it rained inside and suddenly it was flourishing. We started making conferences about all sorts of things. We started inviting people. We even started a ball, which is a funny thing. I knew that the members would look me sideways if I wanted to organize a ball, because I wanted to attract money, basically. But I did not know how to tell them, so I wrote them a letter saying, we want to restore an old tradition to have a ball in Palácio da Bolsa. There had never been a ball in Palácio da Bolsa, but once you tell them we want to restore a tradition, the most traditional people, they buy it and they want to go there, you know, and that's how it starts. This was before the Casa da Música, the House of Music, was ready in Porto. There was nothing going on in Porto culturally. So we mixed culture with business, which is very much what I presented to the city in 2013 as my project, to say, well, we have to start with culture, because once you have culture, you have a brand, and once you have brand, business will come. In 2001, when I went to the Commercial Association, of course, I had never thought that I would one time be mayor of the city. I only started thinking about it in 2009, when I wrote a book which was a success, which in English is called A Question of Character. I wrote a book about the history of the city of Porto. I wanted to write a history of the city. But I wanted also to look at the potential of the city. And I started finding out that we had this incredible opportunity to do something about the city, which we were not doing. So it was as if the city was dead. There was nothing going on. The city was boring. The culture had died. As I wrote this book, I started developing this idea that we needed to take the power of the city, to control the power of the city. So I did not know how to do it, but through the association we started organizing studies with the university about different things, about the airport of Porto, which in those days was still a very small airport. How should we develop the airport? About the port of Leixões, how can we improve the port? How can we improve transport in the city? How can we improve mobility? And then always the culture. How can we do more in terms of culture? And this became actually a sort of political plan, a political agenda. And as I started looking, suddenly there were a lot of people in the city that had not been active politically because they left politics to the parties. And they were coming and they were discussing things. So sooner or later we knew that it would be time for us to do something more. And it happened in 2013 because my predecessor, he had completed 3 terms, he could not compete again. And we thought, well, this is the time where it's now or never, because there is one moment when you really have to decide. And that was the moment of decision. For me, culture was always the thing, since I was a kid. It's what brings people together, you know. Between different generations, you can use culture as the tool to put people together. Culture is really the most important cement. And I think a lot about Europe and what is going on in Europe. And if there's one thing in which we still have an advantage, it's culture. Not only the historical culture, but also the way we look at culture as something totally indispensable in our days. And so that was it's not a belief that I developed at a certain age. I think it was born, or it's part of my family, it's part of the things we discuss. I talk with my children, and I talk with my mother. It was always there. We live a time of fear. We have the fear of immigrants. We have the fear of the changes in climate and all of this happening. It's millennial fears. And culture is the thing that can contribute to solve a lot of these problems. You know, it's if we believe in our culture, if we are able to expand our culture, it is a little bit like a crusade. You know, we did crusades because of religion, which is not my cup of tea. But if we do it through culture, it's totally different, because we attract people and people start thinking differently. And people, if they go together to a concert or they look at an exhibition, and if they develop things together, there is a sort of bond between them, which football will never bring, and I hope, and religion will never bring. But culture is totally, if you want, it's something that spreads. So for me, in politics, more than anything else, more than big buildings or a new waterfront or a new skyline, I think what I wanted to bring to the city was a belief in culture. We started with problematic kids in very poor neighborhoods, and we started with teachers, and we started them with classical music, teaching them to play classical music with classical instruments. What we found out after some years is suddenly they have now much better performance in things like mathematics, which is so important for kids. And normally, poor kids have a huge difficulty with mathematics. And suddenly these kids, these problematic kids, because they play classical music, and they perform classical music, and they travel with classical music, although they spend a lot of time playing music and studying music, they also develop new skills. And the best skills are in mathematics and science, which shows exactly what culture is about. The thing about the sea is, first of all, observation, because I love looking at the sea, watching the sea, the way it's changing. And another thing, it's traveling without a predetermined route. It's sort of freedom. And then is the big horizon, this amazing thing when suddenly you're outside and you just have the horizon. It's like a blue canvas, if you want. That's something which I really enjoy. That's probably why the Portuguese left, because there's this huge attraction of the sea. And I was born in a house just across the sea. From the window of my room, I could see the sea. And I was a kid, and I would try to look, and where's my dad sailing outside? Is he winning the race or not? So maybe there's a sort of magnetic thing towards the sea, and I still enjoy it very much. When I can, I do it. So the citizens of Porto, they care about everything. I walk in the street every day. There are always people coming and talking to me, and normally they are very kind, but they tell me, you know, Mayor, we should change that. I don't like this, and why don't you change that? You see, that's this sort of city where citizens feel very much involved with everything. They have opinions about everything. They are very demanding, and that's one thing I really enjoy about the city. In many cities where I lived, and I lived in London, people are maybe concerned about their house, maybe about their street, and maybe about their underground station. In Porto, people are concerned about the whole thing. You know, and they are very proud, but at the same time very demanding, like everyone who is proud is very demanding. And for them, the city is something which they see as a sort of common place, common property. The sense of common property is the thing I find most challenging in Porto, and which I really enjoy. We developed the brand of the city, which was something which was unheard of. It was part of my plan. And now they sort of took over. Traditionally, people vote according to parties, and they vote for parliament, and then they vote for local elections. They more or less always vote in the same party. Here in Porto, it's totally different. It's strangely different. When I ran for elections, I had 40% on my first election, and the traditional parties had 20 and 20. That's impossible in any other Portuguese city. Why? Because people read the programs and they want to know. And they want to know who is the person. And they voted for me because they know he's the guy who was a sailor, and he's the guy who's a photographer. He's the guy who took care of Palácio da Bolsa, and he's a supporter of our football team. All these things sort of mesh together, you see. It's very tribal in a way, but in a nice way. It's tribal in a nice way. When I lived in Norway, back in the 70s, it was like that. It was normal for politicians to walk around. I remember crossing the park, going for work, and there was the king walking his dog, and everybody was shouting at me, "How are you?" And then the first day after the election, what I did was I went walking. I decided to walk in the street, and everybody was shouting, "Hey, you won the elections." And I just wanted really to not close myself, because if you're unable to go out, you lose contact, you lose touch, and I think that's how we have been doing it. And I think even the people who will not vote for me, who do not like what I'm doing, because every time I take a decision, I'm totally aware I please some and I displease others, but they still appreciate that I'm there to answer them and to tell them why I'm trying to explain. I can't convert them, but I can tell them that we are doing it for a certain reason. I think that's a sort of connection we keep in the city. We are going through a fight of what to do with a scarce resource, which is public space. And of course, this is a sort of conflict I have to manage. I'm the arbitrator of a conflict, where the people who want to drive their cars, they want the big lanes. People want bikes, they want the narrow lanes. People who want to walk, they claim it from the bikes. And at the same time, you want to have green areas. But you still have to have more houses, because if houses are expensive, it's because there is a scarcity of houses. So to manage this sort of, it's a plot going on, and we don't know who's going to win, but I have to arbitrate more than manage. I have to arbitrate, and I think sometimes it's very difficult to do it. But you have to talk to people. You have to explain them why. We spend a lot of time telling people why we do this and why we do that, or why we don't do that. The thing about densifying is you should densify in one way that the densification does not take away public space. And you can do it. You know how? Just to increase a little bit the height of buildings. There's nothing wrong. It's probably best for the environment to have people concentrated on parts of the earth, which allows other parts to still have natural life, wildlife, agriculture, and everything else. So I'm not too concerned about the densification. I think the main problem we have now with sustainability in cities is mobility. Mobility accounts for something like 30 to 40% of our footprint in terms of carbon. And of course we can improve public transport, but the best way is for people to walk. If people can walk to their work or to school, or they can take a tram and only spend 20 minutes on a tram, it's nice. If you live 10 minutes walk from your office or from the school you go to, you're much happier than you have to take a train for 30 minutes or 1 hour, or if you go to São Paulo for 2 or 3 hours. You can't have people spending 6 hours a day traveling. You know why? Because it causes social stratification. Because normally it is the poor people who travel more. Because the wealthy people, they can afford to live where they want, The poorer people, they are expelled to the outside. And then you have poverty. Why? Because these families, where the mother travels 4 hours a day, she can't look after their kids. She can't make sure that they study. These kids are actually condemned to be poor because they live too far away. So this is the reason why it's so important to densify in the proper manner, because it gives people time. I want the city to be able to, basically the city to continue to feel happy about its future. I'm very concerned that somehow the price of the success we have had, and it's not my success, it's the success of everyone who's been involved, the small employers, the employees, the fact that we have a city where we don't have strikes. You know, the underground in Porto never went on strike, which is an amazing thing compared to most cities. The problem is, how can we project this without the tensions we were talking about becoming too high? My main concern really is to provide better opportunities and to be able to keep in the city everyone who wants to live in the city. And that's sometimes not easy, because when you start seeing speculation, land speculation, you worry. And we don't have that many tools to fight speculation. The problem about speculation is it's not when you're fighting over an empty plot of land. It becomes a problem when you're fighting over a neighborhood where there are people who live there, who have lived there for generations, and suddenly they are expelled because they just can't pay the rent. Whenever I do it, I will do the same I did when I sold my business. I want to devote at least 1 or 2 years to myself. Traveling, I want to write again. I need time to write. I need time to be with my grandchildren, so I will need some time again before I plan anything else, and then I will see.